Okay, I'm going to take up here in part of Rob's notes. I have the simple, profound faith that anything I desire in this life can come to me from Framework 2. There are no impediments in Framework 2. Framework 2 can creatively produce everything I desire to have in Framework 1. My excellent health, painting and writing, my excellent relationship with Jane, Jane's own spontaneous and glowing physical health and creativity, the greater and greater sales of all her books. I know that all of those positive goals are worked out in Framework 2, regardless of their seeming complexity, and that they can then show themselves in Framework 1. I have the simple, profound faith that everything I desire in life can come to me from the miraculous workings of Framework 2. I do not need to be concerned with details of any kind, knowing that Framework 2 possesses the infinite creative capacity to handle and produce everything I can possibly ask of it. My simple, profound faith in the creative goodness of Framework 2 is all that is necessary. Part 2, Framework 1 and Framework 2. Let me scroll down here. Myths and Physical Events. This is Chapter 3. The Interior Medium in Which Society Exists. Session 817. January 30th, 1978. Seth's statements at the end of dictation from the 815th session. I will try to begin work on our book in a more predictable fashion, reflected his good intent, but things didn't turn out that way. Jane and I let the holiday season intervene to some extent, and Session 816, which came through the day after Christmas, didn't concern book work at all. Then, starting in early January, we held 8 sessions having to do with questions we'd put off dealing with for a long time. Some were personal, some were not. We stayed with our Monday, Saturday evening session routine, though, and kept busy with all of our other projects. We also experienced a very cold, wintry month, indeed, including a series of massive snowstorms within the week just ended, the worst in over a decade, as I wrote in a note for last Saturday night's private session. Good evening. Good evening, Seth. Dictation. A new chapter to be titled Myths and Physical Events. Then, the interior medium in which society exists. Give us a moment. Before we discuss man and woman's private roles in the nature of mass events, no matter what they are, we must first look into the medium in which events appear concrete and real. The great sweep of the events of nature can be understood only by looking into a portion of their reality that is not apparent to you. We want to examine, therefore, the inner power of natural occurrences. A scientist examining nature studies its exterior, observing the outsideness of nature. Even investigative work involving atoms and molecules, or theoretical faster-than-light particles, concerns the particle nature of reality. The scientist does not usually look for nature's heart. He certainly does not pursue the study of its soul. All being is manifestation of energy. I'll read that again. All being is manifestation of energy. An emotional manifestation of energy. Man can interpret the weather in terms of air pressure and wind current. He can look to fault lines in an effort to understand earthquakes. All of this works at a certain level to a certain degree. Man's psyche, however, is emotionally not only a part of his physical environment, but intimately connected with all of nature's manifestations. Using the terms begun in the last chapter, I will say, then, that man's emotional identification with nature is a strongly felt reality in Framework 2, and there we must look for the answers regarding man's relationship with nature. There in Framework 2, the nature of the psyche appears quite clearly, so that its sweeps and rhythms can be understood. The manifestations of physical energy follow emotional rhythms that cannot be ascertained with gadgets or instruments, however fine. Why is one man killed and not another? Why does an earthquake disrupt an entire area? What is the relationship between the individual and such mass events of nature? Before we can begin to consider such questions, we must take another look at your own world and ascertain its source, for surely its source and natures are the same. We will also, along the line and throughout this book, have to make some distinctions between events and your interpretations of them. It certainly seems that your world is concrete, factual, definite, and that its daily life rests upon known events and facts. You make a clear distinction between fact and fantasy. You take it for granted as a rule that your current knowledge is, as people rest upon scientific data at least, that are unassailable. Certainly, technological development appears to have been built most securely upon a body of concrete ideas. The world's ideas, fantasies, or myths may seem far divorced from current experience. Yet all that you know or experience has its origin in that creative dimension of existence that I am terming Framework 2. In a manner of speaking, your factual world rises on a bed of fantasy, myth, and imagination, from which all of your detailed paraphernalia emerge. What then is myth, and what do I mean by the term? Myth is not a distortion of fact, but the womb through which fact must come. Myth involves an intrinsic understanding of the nature of reality, couched in imaginative terms, carrying a power as strong as nature itself. Myth-making is a natural psychic characteristic, a psychic element that combines with other such elements to form a mythical representation of inner reality. That representation is then used as a model upon which your civilizations are organized, and also as a perceptual tool through whose lens you interpret the private events of your life in their historical context. When you accept myths, you call them facts, of course, for they become so a part of your lives, of societies, and your professions, that their basis seems self-apparent. Myths are vast psychic dramas, more truthful than facts. They provide an ever-enduring theater of reality. It must be clearly understood, then, that when I speak of myths, I mean to imply the nature of psychic events whose enduring reality exists in Framework 2 and forms the patterns that are then interpreted in your world. If someone is caught in a natural disaster, the following questions might be asked. Am I being punished by God, and for what reason? Is the disaster the result of God's vengeance? A scientist might ask instead, with better technology and information, could we somehow have predicted the disaster and saved many lives? He might try to disassociate himself from emotion and to see the disaster simply as the result of a non-personal nature that did not know or care what lay in its path. In all cases, however, such situations instantly bring to mind questions of man's own reality and course, his connections with God, his planet, and the universe. He interprets those questions according to his own beliefs. Let us look at some of them. Now, myths are natural phenomena rising from the psyche of man as surely as giant mountain ranges emerge from the physical planet. Their deeper reality exists, however, in Framework 2 as source material for the world that you know. In those terms, the great religions of your civilization rise from myths that change their characters through the centuries, even as mountain ranges rise and fall. You can see mountain ranges. It would be ridiculous to ignore their reality. You see your myths somewhat less directly, yet they are apparent within all of your activities, and they form the inner structures of all of your civilizations with their multitudinous parts. In those terms, then, Christianity and your other religions are myths, rising in response to an inner knowledge that is too vast to be clothed by facts alone. In those terms also, your science is also quite mythical in nature. This may be more difficult for some of you to perceive since it appears to work so well. Others will be willing enough to see science in its mythical characteristics, but will be most reluctant to see religion as you know it in the same light. To some extent or another, however, all these ideals program your interpretation of events. In this part of the book, we are more or less dealing with the events of nature as you understand it. It will seem obvious to some, again, that a natural disaster is caused by God's vengeance, or is at least a divine reminder to repent, while others will take it for granted that such a catastrophe is completely neutral in character, impersonal, and quite divorced from man's own emotional reality. The Christian scientist is caught in between. Because you divorce yourself from nature, you are not able to understand its manifestations. Often your myths get in the way. When myths become standardized and too literal, when you begin to tie them too tightly to the world of facts, then you misread them entirely. When myths become most factual, they are already becoming less real. Their power becomes constrained. Give us a moment. Most people interpret the realities of their lives, their triumphs and failures, their health or illness, their fortune or misfortune, then, in the light of mythical reality that is not understood as such. What is behind these myths and what is their source of power? Facts are a very handy but weak brew of reality. They immediately consign certain kinds of experiences as real and others as not. The psyche, however, will not be so limited. It exists in a medium of reality, a realm of being in which all possibilities exist. It creates myths the way the ocean creates spray. Myths are originally physical fabrications of such power and strength that whole civilizations can rise from their source. They involve symbols and no emotional validities that are then connected to the physical world so that that world is never the same again. They cast their light over historical events because they are responsible for those events. They mix and merge the inner, unseen, but felt, eternal, psychic experience of man with the temporal events of his physical days, and form a combination that structures thoughts and beliefs from civilization to civilization. In Framework 2, the interior power of nature is ever-changing. The dreams, hopes, aspirations, and fears of man interact in a constant motion that then forms the events of your world. That interaction includes not only man, of course, but the emotional reality of all earthly consciousnesses as well, from a microbe to a scholar, from a frog to a star. You interpret the phenomena of your world according to the mythic characteristics that you have accepted. You organize physical reality, then, through ideas. You use only those perceptions that serve to give those ideas validity. The physical body itself is quite capable of putting the world together in different fashions than the one that is familiar to you. You divorce yourselves from nature and nature's intents far more than the animals do. Nature, in its stormy manifestation, seems like an adversary You must either look for reasons outside of yourselves to explain what seems to be nature's ill intent at such times, or its utter lack of concern. Science often says that nature cares little for the individual, only the species, so then you must often see yourselves as victims in a larger struggle for survival in which your own intents do not carry even the puniest sway. End of dictation, end of session, unless you have questions. There are good things coming. That is all I have to say. Okay. My heartiest regards and a fond good evening. Thank you, Seth. Good night. Jane's delivery in trance had been excellent, concentrated and steady. Okay. Now he's talking about sessions. Okay, I will pass up some of that. Good evening, Seth. Good evening. Now, in explanation, I do not know exactly how to word this, but in a manner of speaking, I take tours through psychological realities, however, or through psychic lands rather than physical ones. Such journeys take no time in your terms. Yet for our sessions I must synchronize many activities so that on some occasions I am with you and I am also involved elsewhere. You have a storm. Weathermen speak of local conditions and merging air currents. But my journeys are in a realm where consciousnesses merge. I do not know if I have specifically mentioned it, but you should understand my constant state of growth, expansion, and development. Recall Rupert's episodes with the psychic library. There are examples of far lesser versions of my activities, and yet in those terms, and using an analogy, I travel to many great universities of the mind. Much of this is difficult to explain again, for information and knowledge is constantly transformed, almost completely reborn, so to speak, though through characteristics that are inherently a part of light itself. Knowledge is changed automatically through the auspices of each consciousness who perceives it. It is magnified and yet refined. It is a constant language, yet one that transforms itself. When I attend these sessions or speak, then I exchange with others a more complicated system of reality than any computer could handle. You do not understand or perceive the ways in which your reality contributes to the foundation of the mass world reality that you experience. Unconsciously, each individual participates in forming that world. In my case, however, I am aware of the same kind of activities, only in regard to many realities rather than one. As I try to increase your capacity for understanding and to expand the scopes of your abilities, so in other kinds of worlds I do the same thing. While our meetings take place in your time and in the physical space of your house, say, the primary encounter must be a subjective inner one, an intersection of consciousness that is then physically experienced. The encounters themselves occur in Framework 3 environment. That framework, of course, again in terms of an analogy, exists another step away from your own Framework 2. I do not want to get into a higher or lower hierarchy here, but the frameworks represent spheres of action. Our encounters initially take place then beyond the sphere that deals exclusively with either your physical world or the inner mental and psychic realm from which your present experience springs. On a very few occasions over the past years, before a session, Rupert has felt a distance between us, or that our material was not quite ready. I have already explained that sometimes I leave you a tape Usually that takes care of any such instances. This evening, however, Rupert somewhat sensed not only a distance, but also the larger complications of my activities. Give us a moment. Now, to some extent, you see, you are both involved, but in ways almost impossible for me to explain. Do not take this literally by any means. Portions of your consciousness are alive in mine, so you are to some extent carried along where I go, as motes of dust might be swept along with a brisk autumn wind from one area to another. Humorously. I am not comparing you with motes of dust by any means. To some extent, however, you do share in my journeys. You are carried above the land of your usual perception, so that portions of you glimpse subjective states. These arouse your curiosity, even when consciously you are not aware of perceiving them. That curiosity acts as impetus. Your intents and concerns, your interests, your needs and desires, your characteristics and abilities directly influence our material, for they lead you to it to begin with. You want to make the material workable in your world, a natural and quite understandable desire. The proof is in the pudding, and so forth. Yet, of course, you are also participants in an immense drama in which the main actions occur outside of your world, in those realms from which your world originated. And you are, foremost, natives of those other realms, as each individual is, as each being is. Those realms are far from lonely, dark, and chaotic. They are also quite different from any concept of nirvana or nothingness. They are composed of ever-spiraling states of existence in which different kinds of consciousnesses meet and communicate. They are not impersonal realms, but are involved in the most highly intimate interactions. Those interactions exist about you all the while, and I would like you in your thoughts to aspire toward them, to try to stretch your perceptions enough so that you become at least somewhat aware of their existence. These frameworks, while I speak of them separately, exist one within the other, and each one impinges upon the other. To some extent you are immersed in all realities. In a strange fashion, and in this particular case, you conflict with your notes. Your conflict with your notes had to do with a sense of orderliness aroused by the need to assemble facts. But this was then carried over so that you wanted to keep your Roman reincarnational world and this present one separate and not merge them through association, as you did, so that it was difficult to know that when you did your sketches, Subjectively, you wanted to put the worlds together to explore the similarities and so forth, but practically you wanted to divide them for your notes. If you can, try to sense the greater context in which you have your being. Your rewards will be astonishing. The emotional realization is what is important, of course, not simply an intellectual acceptance of the ideal. Rupert wanted material on this book, and that is well and good. The book is important. The book has its meaning in your world, but I do not want you to forget the vaster context in which these sessions originate. This kind of information can at least trigger responses on your part, increasing still further the scope of knowledge that you can receive from me. In your world, knowledge must be translated into specifics. Yet we also deal with emotional realities that cannot be so easily deciphered. In this session, in the words I speak, but more importantly in the atmosphere of the session, there are hints of those undecipherable yet powerful realities that will then, in your time, gradually be described in verbal terms that make sense to you. There is more, but it will have to wait simply because it is not presently translatable. According to the impact of this session, your own comprehensions and perceptions will bring other clues, either in the waking or the dream state. Keep your minds open for them, but without any preconceived ideas of how they might appear. Rupert's own development triggers certain psychic activity that then triggers further growth. He has been participating in his library, for example, whether or not he is always aware of it. Thank you, Seth. Good night. Boy, I really felt different while that was going on, Jane said, as soon as she was out of trance. I had a sense of power that I usually don't get. I'm glad I waited. I guess I feel like I've been someplace else or something like that. I have a feeling there's something new in the session, but I'll have to figure it out. Notes, session 818. I'm going to skip that little part. Session 820. Myths and physical events. Okay, I guess I'll read this. It's not much. At lunch today, I suggested to Jane that she put together a short book on the Framework 1 and 2 material Seth had given us since he introduced that concept in a private session last September. We've had 31 private or non-book sessions since then, and a number of them contain information on Frameworks 1 and 2. Much of it is relevant to that presented in mass events. I thought Jane might consider such a book project along with her other work. In a way, the suggestion was my idea of trying to do something about Seth producing books within books, as I discussed in my opening notes for the 814th session. But Seth is so prolific that it seems we'll never get all of his material published all this time. Jane showed more interest in my idea than I thought she would and spent the afternoon going over those private sessions. As the hours passed, she reacted to Seth's data by becoming very loose and relaxed. She felt funny, she said. Still, she wanted to try for the session. We began waiting. Then, without greetings, "Now, how nice that you remembered Framework 2 again." To some extent, the material on Frameworks 1 and 2 is, of course, an example of the entire idea, for you receive a good deal of information in sessions not given to book dictation, simply because while our books are extremely free, still they must be colored by your ideas of what books are. Even your concepts of creativity are necessarily influenced by Framework 1 thinking, of course. So our sessions do indeed follow a larger pattern than that, giving you certain perspectives from different angles in book dictation and in other material. To some extent, larger creative pattern of the material, which does not exist and is sensed, is nevertheless not directly perceived, for you are bound to perceive it piecemeal. I have said that acts of creativity best approach the workings of Framework 2, for those acts always involve leaps of faith and inspiration and the breaking of barriers. Each of our books adds to the others. That includes Rupert's as well, and that also includes, of course, books not yet written in your terms, so that the future books also influence what you think of as the past ones. Again, while appearing in your time, the contents of the books come from outside of your time. When you are writing a regular book, you draw upon associations, memories, and events that are known to you and others, that perhaps you had forgotten but that suddenly spring to mind in answer to your intent and following your associations. When an artist is painting a landscape, he might unconsciously compare hundreds of landscapes viewed in the past in multitudinous, seemingly forgotten hues that splashed upon the grass or trees, or as he seeks for a new, creative combination. Art is his focus, so that he draws from Framework 2 all of those pertinent data that are necessary for his paintings. Not just techniques is concerned, but the entire visual experience of his life. Framework 2 involves a far vaster creative activity in which your life is the art involved, and all of the ingredients for its success are there available. When you are creating a product or a work of art, the results will have much to do with your ideas of what the product is, or what the work of art is. So your ideas about your life, or life itself, will also have much to do with your experience of it as a living art. If you believe in the laws of cause and effect, as accepted, or in the laws of polarity, as accepted, and explained in a letter we received today, then you will be bound by those laws, for they will represent your artistic technique. You will believe that you must use them in order to, say, paint the living portrait of your life. You will therefore structure your experience, drawing to yourself from Framework 2 only that which fits. You will not have the technique to attract other experience, and as long as you stick with one technique, your life pictures will more or less have a certain monotony. Again, the writer or the artist also brings more into his work than the simple ability to write or paint. In one way or another, all of